The great hall of Nexus Prime stretched for nearly 3 kilometers in every direction, its crystalline walls humming with the presence of 847 different species who had gathered to decide the fate of humanity. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the center of this impossibly vast chamber, her formal uniform crisp and her expression carefully neutral as she watched the voting begin. She was 53 years old, born on Mars, raised on Europa, and trained in the finest diplomatic academies Earth had ever produced. But nothing in her education had prepared her for this moment. The holographic display above her head flickered to life, showing the votes as they cascaded in from every corner of the Galactic Assembly. The Kethmari voted yes to Exile, their insectoid representatives clicking their mandibles in satisfaction. The Volante hegemony voted yes, their towering silicon-based forms pulsing with barely contained disdain. The Greth Collective voted yes, all 17 of their hive minds reaching the same conclusions simultaneously. Species after species condemned humanity, and Elena watched it all with the calm patience of someone who had already accepted the inevitable. The charges against Earth were numerous and varied, accumulated over nearly 5 decades of increasingly tense relations with the Galactic Concord. Humanity had reverse-engineered the sacred FTL drives that the Concord had graciously provided, improving upon designs that were meant to remain mysterious, and controlled humanity had asked questions about the precursor ruins on Theta 7. Questions that the Concord had explicitly forbidden. Humanity had developed weapons that could threaten Concord warships, despite being told repeatedly that such development was unnecessary and dangerous. Humanity had spread too quickly, colonized too aggressively, and looked at the stars with a hunger that made the elder species profoundly uncomfortable. But most of all, humanity had refused to know their place. The Concord had welcomed hundreds of species over its 12,000-year history, and all of them had learned the same essential lesson. Civilization meant conformity. Progress meant patience, and ambition meant nothing compared to stability. Humanity had rejected all of these principles with a cheerful disregard that bordered on insanity. The final tally appeared on the display, and Elena felt a strange sense of peace wash over her. 831 species had voted in favor of permanent exile. 12 had abstained, unwilling to commit either way. 4 had voted against, including the Volante Imperium, whose ambassador caught Elena's eye and offered a subtle nod of sympathy. The Grand Arbiter rose from his throne, his ancient body supported by hover fields and medical implants that had kept him alive for nearly 8 centuries. He was the oldest living member of the Concord, a being of immense political power and absolutely no imagination. "The vote is concluded," he announced, his voice amplified to reach every corner of the vast chamber. "Earth and all human colonies are hereby banned from galactic space in perpetuity, and you have 1 standard year to withdraw all personnel, vessels, and infrastructure from Concord territory, and any human found within our borders after this period will be subject to immediate termination." The assembly waited for the inevitable human response. They had seen this before with other species. The desperate pleas for reconsideration, the tearful promises to change, the pathetic bargaining of a civilization that had just lost everything. The Greth Collective had already prepared their recording devices to capture humanity's humiliation. For their entertainment archives, the Volante hegemony had positioned their warriors near the exits, ready to escort the humans out with appropriate force if necessary. The Kethmari had begun composing victory songs, their mandibles already forming the opening verses. Elena Vasquez smiled. It was not a pleasant smile, not a defeated smile, not even an angry smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been told exactly what she needed to hear. "We accept your terms," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustic systems. "And we thank the Concord for clarifying where we stand." The assembly fell silent, confused by this response. "Is that all?" The Arbiter asked, clearly expecting more. That is all. Elena confirmed. We will begin our withdrawal immediately, and we wish the Concord continued success in maintaining galactic peace. She turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a rhythm that seemed almost cheerful behind her. 847 species sat in bewildered silence, trying to understand what had just happened. Wait, the Arbiter called out. Do you not wish to appeal the decision, or request additional time, or negotiate alternative arrangements? Elena paused at the door and looked back over her shoulder. No, she said simply. We understand the Concord's position perfectly, and we have no desire to remain where we are not wanted. She left, and the great doors closed behind her with a sound like thunder in the corridor outside. Her aide was waiting. With a secure communication device already active, Ambassador, the young man said nervously. Earth is requesting your assessment. Elena took the device and spoke 3 words that would change the course of galactic history. Green light confirmed. On the other end of the line, President Marcus Chun of the United Earth Government received the message with a grim nod around him. The highest officials of humanity's scattered civilization waited in tense silence. They did it. Chun announced. They actually voted to exile us. The room erupted in a chaos of emotions. Some angry, some afraid, some confused, but Admiral Sarah Okonkwo of the combined human fleet simply laughed. Those magnificent fools, she said, shaking her head in disbelief. They have no idea what they have just done. Chun raised his hand for silence and addressed the assembly. For 50 years, we have operated under Concord restrictions, unable to develop our full potential, unable to pursue research that might threaten their precious stability, unable to become what we were always meant to be. And now they have given us exactly what we needed. He pulled up a holographic map of the galaxy, highlighting a vast region of unexplored space that the Concord had never bothered to survey. They call it the exclusion zone. Chun continued. Worthless territory with no habitable worlds, no valuable resources, nothing but dust and dying stars. At least that is what their surveys claimed. He smiled, and it was Elena's smile. The smile of someone who knew something that everyone else had missed. Our surveys tell a very different story. The map transformed, revealing thousands of habitable worlds, countless asteroid belts rich with rare minerals, and energy sources that the Concord had never even theorized. They banned us from their galaxy. Chun said quietly, so we will go and build our own. And when we return, they will finally understand what humanity can do when no one is holding us back. The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in somewhere in the vastness of space. A species that had just been exiled was not mourning their loss. They were planning their ascension. Captain Kethra of the Volante observation fleet had been watching the humans for 3 decades, and in all that time, he had never seen anything like this. His orders were simple. Monitor the human withdrawal and report any signs of resistance, rebellion, or desperation. Instead, he was witnessing something that made his scales itch with unease. The humans were leaving, but they were not fleeing every day. His sensors tracked thousands of human vessels moving in perfect coordination, each one loaded with cargo that should have been impossible to transport. Mining colonies that had taken decades to build were being dismantled. In weeks, research stations were stripped down to their foundations and loaded onto freighters that seemed to appear from nowhere. Communication relays, power generators, manufacturing facilities. Even the soil from agricultural domes was being collected and shipped away. Nothing was being abandoned. Nothing was being left behind. Nothing was being wasted. Kethra dictated his daily report with growing concern. Day 47 of human withdrawal. He began. Current estimates suggest the humans have already removed approximately 60% of their infrastructure from Concord space. But the speed and efficiency of this operation continues to exceed all projections. I am forced to conclude that the humans were prepared for this outcome long before the vote took place." He paused, uncertain how to phrase his next observation. Most troubling is the absence of any visible distress among the human population, as standard models suggest that an exiled species should exhibit signs of social breakdown, economic collapse, and widespread panic. But the humans display none of these symptoms, and if I did not know better, I would say they appear almost eager to leave. His report was filed and transmitted to Volante Command, where it joined hundreds of similar observations from across the former human territories. The pattern was unmistakable, but no one wanted to acknowledge what it meant on the border worlds. Something even stranger was happening. Human traders were conducting their final rounds of commerce with an enthusiasm that bordered on aggressive. They sold everything: luxury foods grown in zero-gravity gardens, entertainment media spanning 2 centuries of human creativity, consumer technology that the Concord had long dismissed as primitive, but had always secretly envied. Galactic species snapped up these goods at discount prices, congratulating themselves on taking advantage of humanity's misfortune. What they did not notice was that the humans were buying as well. Raw materials were purchased in enormous quantities, carefully selected for specific properties that the sellers did not understand. Biological samples were acquired from every species willing to trade, always with proper documentation and fair compensation. Manufacturing schematics were licensed for reproduction rights. Technical manuals were collected, and scientific journals were archived. Every transaction was legal. Every purchase was documented. Every exchange was conducted with perfect professionalism. The Greth Collective's trade analysts eventually noticed the pattern and submitted a classified report to the Concord's Economic Council. The humans are not liquidating their assets, the report warned. They are conducting a targeted acquisition of strategic resources, and the breadth and specificity of their purchases suggest a long-term development plan that extends far beyond simple survival. The report was received, filed, and promptly ignored. After all, the humans were leaving, and that was what mattered. 3 months before the deadline, Ambassador Elena Vasquez made one final appearance before the Galactic Assembly. She came to formally surrender humanity's membership credentials and to thank the Concord for their many years of cooperation. The Assembly granted her a brief audience, expecting nothing more than a routine bureaucratic ceremony. Elena stood at the same podium where she had received humanity's exile, and she smiled that same unsettling smile. On behalf of the United Earth Government, I hereby relinquish all rights, privileges, and obligations associated with Concord membership, she announced. We thank the Assembly for their patience during our withdrawal, and we wish to assure all member species that our departure will be complete and orderly. The Arbiter nodded with satisfaction, pleased that the humans were accepting their fate with dignity. We acknowledge your surrender, he replied, and we hope that humanity will find peace in their new circumstances. Elena's smile widened slightly. I'm certain we will find exactly what we are looking for, she said, and I hope the Concord will remember us fondly in the years to come. There was something in her tone that made several delegates uncomfortable, but no one could identify exactly what it was. Is there anything else? The Arbiter asked. Just one small matter, Elena replied. We would like to formally request that the Concord honor the terms of our withdrawal by refraining from entering the exclusion zone for a period of no less than 500 standard years, as we believe this will give us adequate time to establish ourselves without interference. The request was unusual, but not unreasonable. The exclusion zone had been surveyed centuries ago and found worthless, so there was no reason for the Concord to enter it anyway. Granted, the Arbiter said dismissively. The Concord has no interest in worthless territory. We are grateful for your understanding, Elena replied. And there was something in her eyes that looked almost like pity. 3 weeks before the deadline, the last human vessel crossed into the exclusion zone. Captain Kethra watched it go. Recording the moment for historical archives, the ship was a massive colony transport, nearly 5 kilometers long, carrying the final remnants of humanity's presence in Concord space. As it crossed the border, it transmitted a single message on all frequencies. "Thank you for everything you have taught us," the message said. "We will not forget." Then the ship was gone, swallowed by the darkness of unexplored space, and the borders sealed behind it. The Concord celebrated with festivals that lasted for weeks. The human problem had been solved without violence, without economic disruption, without any of the complications that usually accompanied the exile of a troublesome species. The Galactic Assembly congratulated itself on its wisdom and restraint, confident that they had handled the situation perfectly. Only Captain Kethra remained uneasy in his final report before being reassigned. He wrote words that would haunt the Concord for centuries to come. "I have spent 30 years observing humanity," he concluded, "and I have learned one essential truth about their species. And that truth is simply this: humans do not accept defeat. They do not surrender, and they do not give up. So when they smile at you and walk away without protest, it means only one thing, and that thing is that they have already won. And they are simply waiting for you to realize it." His report was classified and buried in the archives. No one wanted to hear warnings about a species that had already been dealt with. Meanwhile, in the depths of the exclusion zone, humanity was just getting started. 50 years after the exile, the galaxy had almost forgotten about humanity. The Concord continued its ancient traditions of slow progress and careful stability. Species rose and fell within the established hierarchy, and life went on as it always had. But small things began to change in ways that no one immediately noticed. The Kethmari weapons manufacturers were the first to feel the impact for decades. They had relied on human-designed targeting systems that they had licensed during the partnership years. And when those systems began to fail and require replacement, they discovered that no one in the Concord could replicate them. The original human engineers were gone. The technical documentation had been incomplete, and the underlying principles involved mathematics that the Kethmari simply could not understand. They adapted by purchasing inferior alternatives from the Valoran hegemony. But their weapons were never quite as accurate again. The Greth Collective noticed the next problem. Their entertainment archives had grown stale without the constant influx of human creative content. And their population was growing restless with boredom. Humans had produced more novels, films, music, and art in a single year than most Concord species produced in a century. And that endless stream of creativity had become an addiction that the collective could not easily replace. They tried to develop their own entertainment industry, but 17 hive minds working in perfect coordination could not replicate the chaotic brilliance of human imagination a century after the exile. The economic impacts became impossible to ignore. Trade routes that had once been efficient now stretched across vast distances to avoid the exclusion zone. Supply chains that had relied on human manufacturing were constantly breaking down. Scientific research that had been accelerated by human curiosity was now proceeding at the same glacial pace it had maintained for millennia. The Concord's economists produced report after report documenting the slow decline, but their recommendations were always the same: adapt, adjust, and continue as before. No one suggested that exiling humanity might have been a mistake. That would have been unthinkable 2 centuries after the exile. The first rumors began to emerge from the border merchant vessels that strayed too close to the exclusion zone, reported strained readings on their sensors, energy signatures that matched no known technology, gravitational anomalies that should have been impossible, and ghost signals in frequencies that no Concord species used. The Concord dismissed these reports as sensor malfunctions or the overactive imaginations of nervous pilots, but the rumors continued to grow. A Valaran survey vessel claimed to have detected artificial structures around the star that had been surveyed as uninhabited centuries ago. A Kathmari patrol ship reported being scanned by an unknown sensor system of incredible power and sophistication. A Grath trading vessel insisted that they had received a transmission in perfect Concord standard, containing nothing but a simple greeting and a set of coordinates that led nowhere. Concord's intelligence services began a quiet investigation, but their findings were inconclusive. Whatever was happening in the exclusion zone, it was beyond their ability to observe or understand. The Volante Imperium, one of the 4 species who had voted against humanity's exile, decided to take a different approach. Ambassador Kethra, the younger grandson of the famous observer captain, was dispatched on a secret diplomatic mission to the edge of the exclusion zone. His orders were to make contact with humanity, if possible, and to determine their current status. What he found was beyond anything he had imagined. At the very edge of Concord space, exactly where the border had been drawn 2 centuries ago, he encountered a structure that defied comprehension. It was a gate, but not like any gate the Concord had ever built. This gate was the size of a small moon, its surface covered with symbols and designs that seemed to shift and change as he watched. His ship was scanned the moment it arrived, and a voice spoke in perfect Volante. Ambassador Kethra, "You are expected," the voice said. "Please proceed through the gate if you wish to continue, or return to Concord space if you prefer. Either choice will be respected." Kethra hesitated for only a moment before ordering his ship forward. The gate activated, and reality bent around him in ways that his instruments could not measure. When he emerged on the other side, he found himself in a system that contained no fewer than 17 inhabited worlds, all of them thriving, all of them covered with cities and forests and oceans and life, human life. His hosts were gracious and welcoming, treating him with a hospitality that seemed almost excessive. They showed him their cities, their factories, their universities, their gardens. They showed him technology that made Concord achievements look primitive by comparison. They showed him art and music and literature that had been produced during the exile, enough to fill archives the size of planets. But most of all, they showed him their numbers. "When we left Concord space," his guide explained, "humanity numbered approximately 12 billion individuals, and that was considered a dangerously large population by Concord standards." The guide smiled, and Kethra recognized that smile from his grandfather's reports. "Today, we number just over 4 trillion, the guide continued, and we occupy territories in 6 different galaxies, connected by a network of gates like the one you passed through. Kethra felt his scales turn pale. 6 galaxies? He repeated weakly. The universe is much larger than the Concord ever imagined, the guide replied. And humanity has always been very good at making ourselves at home. Kethra stayed for 3 months, learning everything he could about what humanity had become. When he finally returned to the Concord, he carried a single message from the human government. "We are not ready to return yet," the message said, "but we will be soon, and when we come back, we hope to find the Concord ready to talk." Kethra delivered his report to the Galactic Assembly, and for the first time in centuries, the Great Hall fell completely silent. "They're not angry," Kethra concluded, his voice barely above a whisper, "and that is what frightens me most, because they have every reason to hate us, and instead, they seem almost grateful." The Arbiter, now so ancient that he was more machine than organic, demanded an explanation. "Grateful for what?" he asked. Kethra looked at the assembled species. at the civilization that had exiled humanity and expected them to fade away into obscurity. And he gave them the only answer he could. Grateful for the time, he said. Grateful for the space and grateful for the motivation. Because we gave them all three, and they used them well. The Concord began preparing for humanity's return that very day. They had 2 centuries to get ready. It would not be enough. 400 years after the exile, humanity came home. The Concord had been watching the border for decades. Their most advanced sensors pointed toward the exclusion zone. Waiting for the first signs of approach, they had built defensive fleets beyond anything in their history, mobilizing resources from across the galaxy to prepare for what they assumed would be an invasion. They had fortified their border worlds, trained their soldiers, and developed weapons based on the fragmentary human technology they still possessed. They were ready for war. What they got was something far more terrifying. The first sign was a gentle signal, broadcast on all frequencies in every language the Concord had ever used. "We are coming through," the signal said. "Please do not be alarmed. We mean you no harm." Then the gates opened, not one gate, not a dozen, but thousands of them, appearing simultaneously across the entire length of the border. Each gate was the size of a small moon, identical to the one Ambassador Kethra had discovered centuries ago. Through these gates came the ships, millions of them. They were not warships. At least not primarily. They were colony ships and trading vessels, research platforms and passenger liners, cargo freighters and pleasure cruisers. Each one was unique, covered with art and decoration that told the story of its construction and the people who lived aboard. Some were small, carrying only a few hundred passengers. Others were vast beyond comprehension, artificial worlds in their own right, home to populations larger than most Concord planets. They came through the gates in perfect formation, spreading out across the border in a display of coordination that should have been impossible for any organic species. And then they stopped. They stopped at the very edge of Concord space, exactly where the border had been drawn 4 centuries ago. And they waited for 3 days. Nothing happened. The Concord fleets held their positions, weapons charged and ready. The human armada remained motionless, making no aggressive moves. Finally, a single small vessel detached from the main fleet and approached the Concord flagship. Ambassador Chen Wei, great-great-grandson of the president who had authorized the withdrawal, requested permission to address the Galactic Assembly. The Arbiter granted his request. Chen Wei arrived at Nexus Prime aboard a shuttle that could have fit in the palm of a Concord warship. He walked into the great hall alone, unarmed, dressed in simple formal attire that would not have looked out of place 4 centuries ago. Behind him, visible through the transparent walls of the station, the human fleet hung in space like a curtain of stars. "Members of the Galactic Assembly," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I bring greetings from the Terran Commonwealth and our associated civilizations. And I come not as a conqueror or as a supplicant, but as a representative of a people who wish to renew their relationship with the galaxy they once called home." The assembly listened in stunned silence. 400 years ago, this body voted to exile humanity from galactic space, Chen Wei continued. "At the time, we were young and ambitious, and we made the elder species uncomfortable with our questions and our curiosity. So you sent us away, hoping that we would learn our place in the cosmos." He smiled, and every species in the room recognized that smile. "We did learn our place," he said, "and it turned out to be much larger than anyone expected." He raised his hand, and a holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber. It showed a map of the universe, but not the universe the Concord knew. This map showed 6 galaxies connected by a network of gates, each one containing thousands of inhabited worlds, each one part of an interstellar civilization that made the Concord look like a small town. "This is what humanity has built during our exile," Chen Wei explained. We have colonized territories spanning 6 galaxies. We have developed technologies that would have taken the Concord millions of years to discover. And we have made contact with civilizations that your ancestors never knew existed. The assembly erupted in chaos. Delegates shouting questions and accusations. Chen Wei waited patiently for silence. We have not come back to destroy you, he said when the noise finally subsided. We have no interest in conquest or revenge, because honestly, we have outgrown such petty concerns. He gestured at the display, highlighting the tiny speck that represented the Concord's territory. Your entire civilization occupies a region of space, roughly equivalent to one of our smaller provinces, he continued. And it would be foolish for us to waste resources on military action against you, when we could simply trade for anything we wanted. The Arbiter rose from his throne, his ancient body trembling with fury. You dare to insult us? He demanded. You dare to come here and mock everything we have built? Chen Wei shook his head. I am not here to insult you, he replied. I am here to offer you something better than the Concord has ever been able to provide. He pulled up another display, showing a document covered in text and diagrams. This is a charter for a new organization, he explained. We call it the Terran Concord, and it is open to any species that wishes to join, regardless of their history with humanity. The assembly fell silent again. Membership is entirely voluntary. Chen Wei continued. And members retain full sovereignty over their internal affairs, but they gain access to our trade networks, our technology, our educational systems, and our protection. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of delegates from species that had voted to exile humanity centuries ago. We are not demanding that you join, he said. We are simply offering you the choice. And whatever you decide, we will respect your decision, because that is how civilized species treat each other. The Arbiter demanded that he leave immediately. Security forces moved to escort him out, but Chen Wei simply smiled and handed a data crystal to the nearest guard. Every species in this room has already received a copy of our proposal, he said, along with a detailed catalog of what we are offering. So take your time to review it, and when you are ready to talk, you know where to find us. He turned and walked out of the chamber, just as Elena Vasquez had done 400 years before. But this time, the assembly did not sit in confused silence. This time, they scrambled for their communication devices, desperate to review the offer that humanity had just placed before them within hours. The first species had announced their intention to leave the Concord and join the Terran alternative. Within days, dozens more had followed within weeks. The Galactic Concord was hemorrhaging members faster than anyone had thought possible. The humans had not come back as invaders. They had come back as competitors, and they were winning without firing a single shot. 10 years after humanity's return, the Galactic Concord was a shadow of what it had once been. 340 species had defected to the Terran Concord, drawn by better trade terms, superior technology, and something the old order had never offered: genuine partnership. The remaining members clung to their ancient traditions with increasing desperation, but every month brought new departures, new defections, new evidence that the old way of doing things was dying. The Kethmari were among the first to leave, their weapons manufacturers eager to regain access to human engineering. The Greth Collective followed soon after, their 17 hive minds finally freed from the crushing boredom that had plagued them for centuries. Even the Valoran hegemony, those proud silicon-based warriors who had been among the loudest voices calling for humanity's exile, eventually submitted their application for membership. Only the core loyalists remained, a handful of species who would rather fade into irrelevance than admit they had been wrong. The Arbiter watched his life's work crumble around him with bitter resignation. He had ruled the Concord for nearly 1,000 years, guiding it through crises and challenges that would have destroyed lesser civilizations, but he had never faced anything like this. The humans were not conquering the galaxy through force, they were conquering it through competence. Their ships were faster and more efficient than Concord vessels. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything the old order could produce. Their economy offered opportunities that the Concord's rigid hierarchy had never allowed, and their culture, that chaotic explosion of creativity and diversity that had once seemed so threatening, was now the most popular entertainment in the known universe. Species that had once dismissed human art as primitive were now consuming it voraciously. Unable to get enough of the stories and music and games that humanity produced, the Arbiter requested a final audience with Ambassador Chun Wei. And to his surprise, the human agreed immediately. They met on a neutral station built specifically for the occasion, a modest structure floating in the space between two dying empires. Chen Wei arrived alone, dressed in formal robes made from silk that had been grown in hydroponics bays aboard generation ships during the Exile. The Arbiter came with a full delegation of advisors and guards, but none of them could change what was about to happen. "You wanted to speak with me," Chun Wei said, taking a seat across from the ancient being. The Arbiter dismissed his attendants with a wave, leaving the two of them alone in the meeting room. "I wanted to understand," the Arbiter replied, his voice weak with age. "You could have destroyed us. You could have taken everything we built and ground it into dust. So why this patience? Why this restraint? Why offer us terms instead of demands?" Chen Wei considered the question carefully outside the window. Ships from both civilizations moved together, their crews mingling in the station's corridors as if 4 centuries of exile had never happened. "When you exiled us," he said finally, "you did so because we were different, because we asked questions you did not want answered, because we pursued knowledge you thought should remain hidden, because we refused to accept limits that you considered sacred." He leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "You were afraid of what we might become," he continued, "and you hoped that exile would either destroy us or force us to submit. But instead, you gave us something we had never had before. What did we give you?" The Arbiter asked. "Freedom," Chun Wei replied simply. "Freedom from your restrictions, freedom from your expectations, freedom to become whatever we chose to be. And we chose to become more than anyone had ever imagined possible." He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "In your galaxy, we were always the outsiders, always the troublemakers, always the species that did not fit into your careful hierarchy. But in the exclusion zone, there was no hierarchy. There were no restrictions. There was only the challenge of survival and the opportunity to build something new." He turned back to face the Arbiter. "You expected us to suffer," he said. "But instead we thrived, because that is what humans do when you give us a challenge. We do not give up. We do not surrender. We do not accept defeat." The Arbiter stared at him, trying to comprehend. "But the anger," he pressed. "Surely you must feel anger at what we did to you, at the injustice of your exile, at the suffering your people endured." Chun Wei smiled, and it was not the sarcastic smile of his ancestors. This smile held genuine warmth, genuine compassion, genuine understanding. "We were angry," he admitted. "For a very long time, we burned with rage at the injustice of our exile, and that anger drove us through the hardest years, through the famines and the plagues and the wars that threatened to tear us apart." He returned to his seat, facing the Arbiter directly. "But anger cannot sustain a civilization forever," he continued. "And eventually, we had to choose what we wanted to become. So we chose to channel that anger into something productive. We chose to build rather than destroy. We chose to prove our worth rather than seek revenge." He reached into his robes and produced a small object, a data crystal containing information that the Arbiter could not begin to imagine. This is the complete archive of human history since the Exile, Chungwei said, placing it on the table between them. 400 years of triumphs and tragedies, of discoveries and disasters, of everything we learned and everything we became. The Arbiter stared at the crystal as if it might bite him. "Why give this to me?" he asked. "Because you deserve to understand," Chunwei replied. "You made a decision 4 centuries ago, and that decision had consequences you never anticipated. And I want you to know exactly what those consequences were." He stood again. "Preparing to leave, you exiled us because we were dangerous," he said. "And you were absolutely right. We were dangerous. And we are even more dangerous now than we were then." He paused at the door, looking back at the ancient being who had ruled the galaxy for a millennium. "But danger is not the same as malice," he continued. "We spent 400 years becoming more dangerous. And we also spent those years becoming better, wiser, more capable of understanding perspectives beyond our own." His smile widened. "You gave us the time we needed to grow up," he said. "And for that, we are grateful." The Arbiter struggled to comprehend this response. "Grateful?" he repeated, his voice hollow. "You banned us from your galaxy," Chunwei said. "So we went and found a bigger one, several of them actually. And the universe is vast beyond anything you ever imagined. Far vaster than the tiny corner of space you tried to confine us to." He stepped through the door, then paused one final time. "Humanity has always been very good at making ourselves at home," he said. "And now we have homes in 6 galaxies, with more being explored every year. And we have friends and allies and partners who have never heard of the Galactic Concord and never will." He looked at the Arbiter with something that might have been pity. "You tried to make us small," he said. "But instead you set us free, and now we are larger than you ever dreamed possible." He left the Arbiter alone with the stars and with the slowly dawning realization that humanity had not returned as conquerors or refugees. They had returned as something far more terrifying. They had returned as the future, and they were still smiling.